Thanks, Vito. Hi, Kim. Good to chat with you again. And hello for everybody joining. So we're going to talk a little bit today about like digital and how that's affecting some of the things with leadership, and also a little bit about how the past couple of years have affected things. So with that, start off with Kim. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Goodcell. A lot of us haven't heard of Goodcell before. So what have you been doing for the past couple of years, and some info on Goodcell?
Yes, so I run marketing at Goodcell, and it's very common that most people haven't heard of us because we are an early stage startup biotech company focused on improving health outcomes through personal biobanking, genetic testing, and health screening. So really our value proposition is empowering individuals to identify, track, and mitigate health risks across the entire health continuum. We really are sort of a broker of various services, and our unique combination of services is none other. We have the only personal biobank in the world, actually, that stores stem cells for adults. So think cord blood banking, but for adults, and only done through a very simple process of one blood draw. So we empower individuals to have more control over their health.
Very interesting. So a startup in this environment, right? So especially with all the stuff in the news and things like that. So how does that affect your marketing and how you go to market?
It's been interesting, yeah. So in the 2 years that I joined, we've been, building our go-to-market strategy, building a brand, really honing in on our value proposition to make sure that the complexity of what we do is actually digestible, addressable, and meaningful. COVID in many ways has been an accelerant for trends that make sense for what we're providing to individuals. So having more agency over your health, digital health, telehealth, having more control over your data. These are all themes that very much gave us an opportunity to provide more value to what consumers are looking for. Even the patient-physician relationship has changed dramatically. It's been harder to meet people physically, right? And people are making different choices about their health, both in terms of trying to understand their risks today, but also trying to understand how can they mitigate risks in the future. And building a team and building functions and building a culture during COVID for certain has been extremely challenging, like many of us have been discussing. And our founder, actually, he talks about wanting to write a book on starting a company from scratch during COVID, because we certainly, I think the majority of us were hired after COVID hit. But we still managed to really create an incredible culture of collaboration when, we've been primarily remote, but we've also been fortunate to be hybrid probably half the time, and being very selective for in-person meetings in order to be able to look people in the eye, make big decisions, pivot when we needed to. But also, sort of the always on culture has been accelerated for good and for bad, as we've all been discussing today. But that has allowed us to be very agile, right? And move quickly, because technology has just accelerated how we do business on a daily basis.
That's interesting. So that leads to actually two questions. The first one would be, outside of COVID, there's also all this privacy stuff and all the things we hear about that, and coming in with a medical product, especially one with a lot of first-party data. How are you guys working through that with all the privacy and the news and the fake news and all that stuff? How does that affect everything?
Yeah, there's definitely been enough bad actors out there that, in many ways just reinforce the need to be much more transparent about how data is used, and also really forcing the need for trust to be first and foremost in terms of, establishing the one-to-one relationship between the company and the consumer. So we take a very high touch approach to our services. Any member who joins us gets a dedicated customer support person, a true person with a name, who takes them through the entire journey and helps them understand how their data is being used. So all of our data is anonymized and de-identified, and except for the labs that work with us, which is transparent in our privacy policy and how we operate. But really, it's all about control of your data, because we provide a personal dashboard where your results show up. Think like a health portal, right? So just think about how you interact with your physicians and whatever tests you may get over the course of your lifetime. But this is where everything can sit in one place. And you access that dashboard and choose who you may or may not want to share that data with, whether it's your physician, a family member, that's really up to you.
Now that leads to the next question. So how do you look at your sales channels, or how do you market in that environment, right? I mean, it's a specific type of marketing. It's a specific type of sale.
Right.
You know, it's not like you can go down to your local 7-Eleven and get this, right? So how do you go about with that whole process?
Yeah, so there's various channels in which we quote sell our product, but to your point, I mean, we are primarily a subscription, email, e-commerce based system, right? So it's all about subscription and acquisition. And that means that we have to build awareness and traffic to our site in order to educate people, yes, who we are and what we do, but also reasons to purchase Goodcell. We're not a tchotchke, obviously, right? So much harder when it's a health service and something at a more premium price. But we've also been working with affiliate channels. So think benefit administrators and healthcare providers who are promoting us on their portals, because it's a win-win, right? So we help improve health outcomes, and even in doing that, we reduce costs of healthcare. So that's in the interest of the benefit administrators, and they're promoting us on their channels, which gives us, a trusted environment for participants who are already in the mindset of being more proactive about their health, and have the equity already built in the trust with their brand and their participants. So that has been very meaningful for us. And then the consumer marketing is really a DTC approach to surround sound that consumer. So if you happen to see that banner ad on a health portal, but then you go and search for us, we have to be discoverable, right? And discoverable in a way in which you might search for something of a like-minded product. Most people don't know what personal biobanking is, but they're familiar with either cord blood banking, or they're familiar with genetic testing, and they might have brands like 23andMe in mind, but we're quite different because we give a much more comprehensive, holistic, and medically actionable view of all the different markers, whether they're in your genes or in your blood from a biomarker perspective of what your health risks are. And we have to educate that in a way that is very tangible and in plain language. So even though we're science heavy, and it's really the science that is the proof behind what we do, it's very new and futuristic. So we have to be in channels where the consumer is, and it's primarily digitally led. But we also are talking to providers, and I think eventually KOLs will be important for us, but we are at early stages of going to market. So more to come on which channels are going to work hardest for us.
That's interesting. Trying to do awareness and conversion and being a startup. I don't envy your position right now. But the interesting part of that is, as we look at digital kind of thing and stuff, how do you guys do your digital marketing, right? Is there a focus in certain media types, and why do you do it that way?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be pretty like precision marketing is important for us, and really performance marketing is where we're pivoting to, because to your point, I mean, yes, we need awareness, but at the end of the day, if we don't create urgency, and if we aren't able to follow someone in their journey where they are in the right moment, we're gonna miss that moment. And for us, we're not as aligned to quote life moments like other services are. We have to kind of be there all the time. And so having the ability to retarget and all the way down to the funnel, bottom of the funnel, is really key. So we're in classic digital channels that work hardest for that: digital display, paid search, social, and CTV. And so far, those channels are working very well for driving interest and visits to our site. I think the other thing, though, is that once people come into our house, if you will, then we have to nurture them. And so we're finding that email marketing is actually a very powerful channel for us as well when it comes to nurturing and further educating folks on why Goodcell.
That makes sense. Had a couple of questions that popped up that were
Great.
kind of in line with what we were talking about. So one of the questions, and this was also from me, but it's great to see it's coming from the listeners as well, is as a startup in a high growth area and a large market opportunity, right? So you're hearing all this stuff, 23andMe, as you mentioned, stuff like that. How do you set your budgets, or how do you define how much you're going to spend in marketing, right? Is it a percent of sales? Is it a bottom-up approach, or have you come up with a different way to allocate the spend?
Yeah, I mean, in year one for us, marketing is probably getting a more favorable share of spend, just because, as you know, when you're building a brand from scratch, you're building everything from the look and feel of the brand to the assets in which the brand has to be birthed into the world, right? So there's a lot of upfront costs or sunk costs, and the cost of entry in that first year to establish that foundation is much higher. And that's something that we talk a lot about. So that year one has been foundational, and also media, right? As you go live with media without any awareness, the cost of acquisition is going to be higher. But once you start establishing baseline awareness, then your media can be much more efficient and effective. So the year one, it was sort of an understanding that share of marketing was going to be much higher than year 2 and 3 and beyond. So it wasn't much as an art and a science in year one. It was more like bottom up. Here are the things that need to be done, and this is what it's going to cost. And then playing out scenarios on how we're going to scale and optimize going forward.
So that gets into, I know we talked about this before, but touches and sales cycles and things like that. For this type of product, how do you see that? I know you were at a whole different type of product before you came here. So what has been the biggest challenge, and how do you define the difference between the two, right? I mean, aside from the fact that it's totally different products, but how do you see the change between this product and the previous one, and what's been your biggest challenge?
Yeah, I mean, we are a new product, a new brand in a very niche industry. You could say that, we've sort of created our own niche industry within sort of a larger, biotech, but really healthcare industry. And there aren't really established best practices, right? Nor do we have any benchmarks to go by. So we have to assume that until that education is established, it's going to take multiple touches. We don't know yet how many touches it's going to take. And in some ways it could be seasonal. If someone's more in the mindset, say right now we're in open enrollment and, FSA deadlines are happening, although they're rolling all the time, but some of the bigger ones are happening this quarter. And we are FSA and HSA eligible. That gives us an opportunity to say, hey, use your dollars wisely to invest in something like Goodcell. That may take fewer touches because there is urgency, but we believe probably in year one it's going to take anything between 3 to 15 touches, and that means anything from retargeting someone in display to nurturing them through email automation and subjects that are most meaningful to them. We haven't figured out yet how many touches it's going to take because our audiences right now are quite vast, but we do know who our sort of target profile is, and we're seeing that drive traction for us. So the more we learn about our audience, the quicker we're going to be able to convert.
Makes sense. And so what's been the biggest challenge for you personally going, from one type of marketing to another, right? I mean, it's almost like night and day.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, at Boston Beer, we had well-established brands, right? Like Samuel Adams, in an extraordinarily competitive landscape. But there was also new brands like Truly Hard Seltzer in a new space that is now the lion's share of where growth is in the beer occasion industry. And so building a new brand with a competitive space, yes, we had established, understanding of the occasion and, reasons to believe. But it still meant that you had to build a brand for me. It wasn't just going to be a sales-led, product-led approach to marketing. That was not what was going to work, even though historically that may have been what worked. And so that applies very much to what, we have to build at Goodcell, is that we may drink our own Kool-Aid and think our product is absolutely amazing. But if the brand doesn't show up in a credible, meaningful way where you're a brand for that target, and have that sort of affinity that is going to build that trust in order to say, okay, now I get it. And I think the product is pretty cool. It has to be a win-win between both product and brand. And so that applies very much with what we're doing. I think the greatest leap is just the complexity of what we do. And so we've sort of coined a phrase in partnership with some research some cultural intelligence that we did on the notion of simplicity. How do we take something very complex and make it simple so that it can be something that someone can get very quickly?
Right. Yeah, it is a unique kind of product thing. So we've been hearing about some of the Theranos and some of that other stuff that's out there. So how does that impact your messaging, or does it at all? Or you just say, hey, that's something different, we're something different. And does it become part of your messaging, or?
No, it is very different. But, for us, part of our culture from the beginning has been authenticity. And that goes with building trust too, with our consumers. We would not be in business if we did not put trust first and foremost. And also because the science is complex, the credibility behind our founders and the science behind our founders and the institutions that represent our founders, like one of our co-founders is the co-founder of the Harvard Stem Cell Institute. That allows us to just be pretty straightforward on what the science can and cannot do. And, being, transparent about who's behind and what's behind Goodcell. So, in early days, certainly when Theranos was, in its previous chapter of being in the headlines, was something where we just sort of held up of, that's not who we are. That's not who we're going to be. And that, and that makes sense, right? So for us, it doesn't really impact us on a daily basis. It's just something that we're like, that's just not us.
Okay. Now, you personally, why did you make the jump from where you were to this place, right? So was it what got you excited about this opportunity?
Yeah, a confluence of many things. So before I was at Boston Beer, I was on the agency side for 20 years, and a lot of my work was in the healthcare and technology space. And when I look back, Boston Beer was amazing. I enjoyed every moment of it. Super fun, amazing brands. But after 4 years, it was time to move on. And I wanted something that was going to be more intellectually stimulating and something more meaningful. And given what was happening, COVID was just happening, and I wanted to do something that was a little more meaningful. Also, the Boston market, which is where I am, is exploding in the biotech space. And I had the pleasure of meeting the founders, and I was absolutely blown away by their vision. But also them as individuals, and culture, I think, is absolutely critical. And having someone who's going to be a champion for you and fully empower you to help build something. I've also always been a builder, an entrepreneur at heart, because in all my roles, from the agency side to even Boston Beer, my remit was to build new functions from scratch. And I always enjoyed that. And that applies in a startup or a large organization like Boston Beer.
That's great. So you mentioned culture. So how's that? How are you guys getting that culture out now that you mentioned it was tough to kind of get the brand going and hire people and stuff. So how do you guys do that culture explosion within the company, right? How do you get that out to the folks within the company?
I'm not gonna lie, it's very hard. And I think the spirit of collaboration, the spirit of needing to get things done, right, sort of level sets everyone. So there's no errors, there's no room for errors. Arrogance is just it's not something that works or allowed, and is shot down pretty quickly. People need to be solution oriented, but it also means that good ideas can come from anywhere. That said, there has to be high empathy for how people are doing, just like we've all been talking about, in terms of we're all human at the end of the day, and striking a balance between, quote, work and life when you're a startup and really need to be working 24/7 has been challenging, right? And we've also all talked about how the Zoom culture and the sort of digital business culture has made it hard for people to have more life time. But I would say we do a pretty darn good job of it. But building that physical culture has been very challenging. We've had the benefit of a lovely office space, but not conducive to COVID space, and we're moving into new space actually that will allow people to be able to have a little more space and still meet safely. But I would say that has been a miss for us in terms of just not being able to get large groups together, even for just culture building exercises. But we started doing some offsites, particularly among our leadership team, and that has been extremely meaningful. And we have a new CEO who joined us in the last 2 months, and culture is first and foremost for him. So it has to come from the top down for sure.
I totally agree with you there. So how has everything affected your leadership style? Has it changed with the staff, or you try to stay the same across your multiple jobs, agency, Boston Beer here?
Right.
How's that expanded or changed or not at all?
I think in some ways it's brought out some strengths that needed to be had for this new environment. So I've always been about unlocking everyone's greatest potential, including my own, right? So sometimes that means pushing you to the edge. Sometimes that means throwing you, and when I say you, either myself, my peers, or those I manage, and throwing them new things and say, figure it out. And they could say, all right, I'm in, or they could say, mea culpa, but giving people the ability to do that and to run with things and to own things that are not necessarily, they don't have to be in the JD or scope of the day, right? It could be something that, yes, get your tasks done, but also try and own something new that could benefit across multiple functions and across the enterprise. And I've seen that work really, really well. And I think even the hybrid cultures in some ways further enabled that a little bit, giving people a little bit more room to try things differently and to fail too. And that's, I think, really critical, is that yes, fail, but I mean, it's cliche, but fail fast. But I think that is all the more important, particularly at a startup.
So going into 2022, based on the lessons for the past 2 years, what are some of your biggest, initiatives, both personally and from a company point of view? What are you guys looking at as your initiatives for 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said at the top of the conversation, a lot of the trends that COVID's been an accelerant for are here to stay, and I think will be even more grounded in 2022. So again, being more proactive about your health and having more agency over your health, and thinking about not just your health today, but in the future, is going to be all the more established in 2022 and important. And as people go into the new year and thinking new year, new you, I think that the mindset of what that means is highly evolved. And that's good for Goodcell, but also, planning for the future. There are a lot of, unfortunate, folks who have suffered severely of being really caught off guard, and whether for themselves or a loved one. I think that's where folks want to try to better understand risk profiles and what the future may hold, and what is the role of predictive medicine and the role also of precision medicine. So there's a massive increase in cell therapy, for example, and that's something that is very important for our members at Goodcell, because we store stem cells, but right now there are known cell therapies, but most of them are the ones that are going to be truly impactful to some of the largest disease globally are still in trials, but it's imminent. So the FDA, for example, predicts that it's going to release new medicines based on cell therapy and gene therapy in 2020, starting in 2025, about 10 to 20 a year. And 2025 is tomorrow practically, right? And we're talking about major diseases like Parkinson's, for example, right? And there's several already available for cancers, but more for cancers. Ultimately for other neurodegenerative diseases. So there's a lot of reason to think now for a very imminent future. And the science is really, advancing very quickly. So we talk about today's science is tomorrow's medicine. And I think we're going to see that all the more in 2022.
Got it. So what do you think your biggest challenge in 2022 is going to be?
Well, given the stage that we are as a company, 2022 is the year for us to, scale. And scale can happen in many shapes and forms. And so it's going to be a lot of parallel pathing of learning and optimizing and scaling.
So yeah, no, that's a big task. So wish you the best of luck with that. And everybody talks about the whole hiring thing and finding people. Are you guys running into similar issues or?
Sure. I mean, we're like many organizations are figuring out what's the right balance between in-house and out-of-house capabilities, right? And we've been fortunate to work with some incredible agency partners to help us, lay the groundwork. But we also know we need to be much more agile in-house. And so, for instance, building custom creative services to support our sales channels, to a performance marketing engine that is highly based in data and analytics, right? So even between just those two things, you can imagine how many folks we would love to hire. But finding talent, particularly in sales, is challenging, and in marketing. And more sort of niche or sub-functional expertise, right? Like performance marketing, for example. We're hiring a performance marketing director right now, and we've seen a couple great candidates, but we certainly would be happier if we were seeing more of them, right? So it's an interesting market right now for sure. And I think the agency world has significantly changed as well. Advertising companies have had to pivot in many ways, but PR agencies, they've had a boom this year, and I think will continue to in 2022. Which in some ways is wonderful for brands and organizations that are seeking higher quality partners, but also partners that can be best suited for you, right? Like not every partner is going to, just because they have a great, list of clients and case studies doesn't mean that you're the right fit. For us as a startup, going with a very large organization that can't give us a high touch, customized feel and be willing to grow with us is not going to work. But at the same time, having a tiny little boutique with a boutique, sometimes that's the blind leading the blind, right? And we want to have the benefit of the best practices from the weight of larger clients that they work with. So figuring out that balance, and it goes to chemistry fit too. Like for me, our agency partners and vendors are really partners. They're an extension of my team. And so just having a mindset of they're a vendor, never really works, but particularly given that they're literally an extension of my team, I have to treat them that way and bring them into the fold on a business level. Because that was something that that was a big reason why I went from agency to brand, is that I could actually see what the benefit was to the business, see how it's actually going to get executed. And I try to do that with my partners so that they're side by side with me to understand how we're driving the business.
Yeah, we need to clone you and put you out in other brands and get that going. So as a person who's leading marketing at startup, what advice do you have for folks that are thinking about, hey, I want to do my own thing, I want to grow this?
It's not for everyone. I'll just start with that. I think you have to have a really good sense of yourself in terms of how much are you willing to be uncomfortable, and how much are you willing to work up, down, and sideways, and get in the weeds. So for me, I knew I had that stamina and that level of curiosity and interest. A couple mentors ago said, be ever curious. And I say that to my team all the time, but that's also how I operate on a daily basis. Because you're always mining for solutions or for ways of doing things differently, but you also have to be willing to pivot, and you have to be willing to be like, well, gosh, I just spent 6 months doing that, but I guess that's oh, well, take that as learning and move on and do something differently. So also having not being precious about anything that you've done, and just really thinking about the business first. And that way, you don't get emotional about it. It's just about the business at the end of the day. But it's also about making sure that you feel you're in a space where you're being intellectually challenged. So for me, my learning curve is practically vertical on a daily basis, and I love that. But that's not for everybody. And also, we don't exactly have, processes established all over the place. We'll get there, and we want to, but people have to be comfortable to come in and be like, okay, you don't have a process for this? How about I establish one? And let people raise their hands on how they can contribute to set the framework that they are comfortable working in.
Yeah, that's great advice. Appreciate that. Anything I missed that you want to talk about? Is there something that you want to let the people know about that we haven't covered today? Or
yeah, sure. I mean, I think, one thing that I also would say is important, whether it's for a startup or a larger organization, is to just bring the outside in. And it's easy to drink your own Kool-Aid, right? But I think, being able to test and learn and test and learn and test and learn is critical for any size of organization. We did a lot of baseline awareness to try and understand, how we would go to market, but now we're in market and we need to sort of, continue to validate our thinking. But I would also say that for the outside in, we've been very, very fortunate to bring exceptional strategic advisors on board. If you go to our website, you'll see announcements on, for instance, recently we brought on Dr. Ami Bhatt, who is the director of telecardiology at MGH and is also the president-elect of the American Heart Association's Boston board. She's an example of some of the amazing strategic advisors that have decided to join Goodcell because they believe in our vision and our mission. But we're also bringing them into the fold to further advance our IP, right? And to think about how they talk to their patients so we can think about how we talk to our consumers. And that's really critical. Surround sounding you with good advisors who can call you on your BS, but also make you think a little differently.
That's great advice as well. That's something a lot of, especially startups, mess up on. So that's fantastic. Which that makes me think about another question that popped up. Is part of being in marketing is actually messaging up as well as out and down, right? So talk a little bit about that. Like how do you do the internal communications with what's going on versus what's outside, right? What's the external communication about the company? How does that fit in with what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, we meet as a leadership team on a weekly basis, and we have regular meetings with our advisors as well, so that we can really cross-check ourselves in terms of are we thinking correctly about the product and the value proposition? How do we harness, those around us, like I just mentioned, Dr. Ami Bhatt, to do, testimonials that will help that we can leverage on the outside so that there's that third party credibility. So it's not just about Goodcell, but it's about, why Goodcell through the eyes of experts. So trying to bring our in-house expertise as a voice for outside to the consumer so they can say, oh, okay, I didn't realize it was those scientists that are behind Goodcell. Now I'm willing to pay a little more attention. So it's a full ecosystem. And then even harnessing the experience of our members, right? So once you're fully onboarded and you've had a wonderful experience, or you've been impacted because you found out something that you and your family now know about and can get ahead of, we want to harness those stories if those members are willing to share them. Because we believe on, the potential impact, not just on one-to-one, but one to their family, to their friends, and ultimately to humankind, right? It's about sharing positive experiences on how you can have more agency over your health. And what better way to do that through a more viral effect from the members who are part of Goodcell.
Yeah, that's very important piece there. And how does that tie into like product development, right? So I run products and marketing, so I see sometimes there's a little bit of clash in communications and leadership and all that. How do you guys handle that? You get input from advisors, you get input from the market. How does that affect how you guys do product development?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we get a lot of feedback, particularly on the back end, on the operational side. So how we deliver our services, we're constantly, I mentioned that high touch one-on-one approach for customer support. And that actually gives us a very direct line on what is the experience like? How do we do it differently? We survey and we also ask one-on-one throughout the whole onboarding process. And through that, we learn what components of our services are most meaningful to the individual and why. And so it actually differs depending on not only the individual, but the channel in which we're selling, on whether it's the genetic testing or the biobanking that is more meaningful to them. So for us, it's a little challenging because we need to take a holistic view, right? But we also have the opportunity to have components of our services be the lead horse. And then we have a very robust pipeline of additional IP that's in development, and additional tests that also are easily done off of our platform as it stands today. And so as we gain volume, right, of members, we learn very quickly, not only based on general population data of X amount of population is more predisposed to X cancer versus, say, diabetes, then we know that we need to be able to provide a deeper pipeline against those disease states. And that's something that informs very much how our R&D profile is.
Yeah, so that must make like difficult for like beta testing and stuff like that, because I mean it's like how do you do that with this kind of product, right? So I mean you get the feedback, but as a new product, it's not like you can put out in the market, be like, yeah, we're going to test it, and if it doesn't work, we'll pull it back. Like, you know, that's the kind of stuff I'm used to. So how do you guys do that new product development? What takes shape there?
Very research heavy, right? Lots of pilots that happen in partnership with very credible organizations. So, you know, right now we work with the New York Blood Bank on looking at different ways in which we can deliver services, not just, you know, to individuals, but to communities too. There's another organization in Texas that we're talking to that is already linked into the community of wanting to better impact, you know, more, those who are more predisposed to certain diseases. So I think it's attaching ourselves to those who are already invested in certain areas that are relevant to us. And that gives us the ability to pilot and scale quickly on the data that is needed to inform that R&D.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we have hit our time limit here. So yeah, no, I appreciate you jumping on and sharing all your thoughts and stuff with us. So it's been great.